Thank you, everybody. My name is Ronit Ghose. I'm calling in today from Dubai, from a nice afternoon here. Delighted to have with me on the line, Mike Cunningham. Mike, you there? Tell us a little bit about your role at Al Fransi. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Mike.
Yeah, sure thing. So I'm coming to you live from the Lake District in the UK. So even though I am working in Saudi Arabia for Banque Saudi Fransi, I got out of Riyadh on the last plane, and I'm here safe and sound with my family in the middle of the British rolling countryside. At Saudi Fransi, I'm the Chief Strategy and Digital Officer. I've been there for about 18 months now. Love it. I absolutely adore it. Within my role, I look after 5 divisions within the strategy and digital group. The first one is group strategy, and it pretty much does what it says on the tin. I've got a very kind of small focused team of BCG and McKinsey consultants that work with me in there. My second division is group strategy delivery. These guys are kind of tasked with the delivery of our 12 strategic programs, program directors, business analysts, making the 5-year strategy come to life. I've then got group customer experience. I call this the conscience of the organization, and it's how we kind of capture the voice of the customer. So for all of the customer journeys right across the organization, be them within the retail business, the private business, or the wholesale business, we track these on an almost real-time basis and get feedback and look to see where we could improve around that. So it gives us a good pipeline into my fourth group, which is group digital. Group digital is less focused on like the next version of the mobile banking app in retail, for instance. There's a small team in retail that take care of that, but it's more focused on what we do at a strategic level. So, how can we create new ventures? How can we exploit financial technology to drive the business forward, to some of the bigger type stuff. And then finally, I've also got group marketing and corporate communications. So I look after brand, all of the campaign type stuff that we do, PR, all of that good stuff. Team in Riyadh of almost 30 people, started from maybe 2 that I inherited. So we've built it up. They're super talent. Honestly, I'm so proud of the people I work with. But I expect that to grow pretty significantly over the next 12 months. And then I've got roughly the same amount of people focused very heavily on digital out of London. And they're focused more around product and the engineering side of things.
Great, thanks for that introduction, Mike. So today's webinar is for us to talk about digital and our businesses, how banks are dealing with this COVID pandemic. I'd love to get in, both you and I have been in banking a long time, and I'd love to get your thoughts on just how banks are responding generically, whether it's your bank, Al Fransi, banks in the GCC, or banks in the UK. How do you see banks responding to this quote unquote crisis compared to previous crises, whether economic, financial, or political? What can we read across from previous experiences? What's completely new and different this time around?
Yeah, good question. So actually, I think this time it's so much different. I'm going to show my age now, but this is probably the 3rd major financial crisis, maybe 4th at a stretch.
Oh, they come around every few years now. I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we've had 3 in the last 12 years, I think.
That's crazy. Right, yeah. And I'm the 25-year banking veteran now. So yeah, probably my 4th real big one. But I think this one's really different. You look at the others, particularly the last one, the 2008, 2009, quantitative easing, printing money, all of that type of stuff worked well. This time, it's just not enough. It's needed for sure, no doubt. But this time, our first priority has been the welfare of our people. Whereas when you look at 2008, 2009, welfare of people was probably the last on banks' minds. I still remember the pictures of Lehman Brothers when that went under.
Sure.
all their people just walking out with kind of, cardboard boxes.
boxes. Yeah.
Absolutely, right. And
Yeah.
I haven't
Uh,
really seen any of that, particularly in the kingdom as well.
yeah.
When I reflect how we at Banque Saudi Fransi have organised around this, we've been through a very kind of controlled 4-stage process. So first and foremost, it's been putting the safety of our people first. So how can we get flexible working in place? How can we get remote working in place? The level of disinfection that's gone on in all of the offices, the branches, this type of thing, and we've done lots of communications on a very, very regular basis. Never ever did I expect to see a formal corporate WhatsApp group stood up, but now we've got it. It's how we talk to all of our people on a daily basis, if not multiple times a day. We've also seen the rollout of collaboration tools, which my team's been using anyway. So I'm talking about things like Slack, etc. But this has actually gone broader now, all the way up to to very senior levels of the organisation. I think the second kind of step in the process was around how do we create transparency and open communications with all of our stakeholders. We've done lots of comms to our customers to make sure that they understand that we're doing our utmost to stand with them in these times. We've had a very, very kind of balanced mindset and tried to make everything as business as usual as possible. And we've been working very closely with the regulator. Sam has impressed the socks off me over this crisis, what they've done working with government and the implementation of different stimulus packages and the likes. It's been amazing to watch. I think the third step that we've been through is around reshaping our strategy and how we kind of maintain our business continuity as it stands today. So you've done all of the stuff that we would have done in every other kind of financial crisis, looking at liquidity, stress testing. We've got this double whammy of COVID, but we've also got that second whammy of oil prices.
Sure.
We've had to kind of manage around that. We've been very, very kind of focused on assessing other financial and operational risks. When you look at on an operational risk side, cyber security has been right at the forefront. Not just because we've been doing kind of a lot more remote working and the likes, but because hackers have been trying to take advantage of these things. You've obviously read all about Zoom and some of the holes in there that the guys have been working hard to fix. But the information security guys have been very, very kind of proactive in terms of helping all of us as remote workers spot these potential threats and what we should do if we find them and the likes of it. 2020 budget, well, that's blown, right? I think pretty much for all of the banks, all those business assumptions are out the way. And we've looked at the kind of impact that this will have on our 5-year strategy. At BSF, we are in year 2 of our 5-year strategy. So we've been trying to kind of reshape, what that looks like. And then the fourth bit, which we haven't really started yet, and we'll do this when we think that we're on the exit of this, but that's more around re-challenging the business assumptions that we had within our 5-year strategy so that we start to reshape that. And then, further execution on a lot of the kind of digital and customer and remediation programs that we have. But honestly, in terms of my big takeaway, as I try to draw comparison between this and previous crises, is that we just got no idea when this is going to end. And, my gut feel, and I'm no kind of immunologist or doctor or professional in any kind of way, so please just take this as my humble opinion, but there's always got to be a risk of a second wave of this pandemic, until we get mass immunization in place or that herd immunity really kind of kicks in. There's always that risk if we open the doors again too soon. And I think given that, it just means that being better prepared for a second wave means better digital for the banks.
Mike, I want to pick up on a few things you mentioned there, and maybe starting right at the beginning of the comparison with 2008. And we all remember the pictures, many of us lived through it, of people coming out of banks holding their cardboard boxes in New York and London. And this time around, you mentioned in the Kingdom and some of the big banks in the UK and the US have said the same thing. No job layoffs. We're going to look after our people. There's been a very different kind of reaction from the top, much more compassionate, protecting your human assets as well as the balance sheet. Why do you think that is? And does that mean we're going to be a little bit less sort of open? You mentioned communication channels. You've talked about a corporate WhatsApp group being set up, Slack. For startups and tech companies, not a big thing, but for a bank to use Slack is quite a big thing. Is there going to be somewhat of a more compassionate, open approach from this crisis, or is there a risk that actually, oftentimes what happens in a crisis is that we kind of look for what we're safest with. We go back to the terrible phrase, we go back to basics and say, this is what I know, this is what I'm going to stick to. None of this innovation stuff. Mike, you go back to your strategy corner. This is how we've done things forever in ABC Bank or BSF Bank.
Yeah.
How do you think this tug of war will play out? Sorry, there were like 3 different questions in there I think I threw out.
Yeah, no. Look, I'll do my best to try and answer them all. But I think a lot of it depends upon the leadership of the organization. I've got, I worked for, 10 years in the UAE, had a great 8 years with Abu Dhabi Commercial Bank. And I remember when the 2008 financial crisis kind of hit, and I joined that bank right in the midst of it. And, a strategy and, previously at Barclays, I was amongst lots of other things, but one of my big roles that I'd done was kind of like an axeman. Go out, save costs, reduce headcount, and we were forever going through these types of things. So that's all I knew. So when I landed into Abu Dhabi in the middle of this, the worst that we'd seen, sat with chairman and CEO there and kind of like, okay, so let's get rid of 30% of staff. And it was amazing to hear the board tell me in no uncertain terms to get out and find a different way. At ADCB, we don't make people redundant. They've never made a single person redundant ever. And it really kind of changed my mindset, but it's just that passion from the top. Banque Saudi Fransi is absolutely no different. The empathy that the leadership team, that my peers on the exco there, all feel the same. It's about, one for all for one, and protecting one another. I don't think it's like that for all banks. I've got friends in other banks in the UAE, where there's rumor mills of, you're going to have to take a 20% haircut on your salary. It might not just be for the period of time that the crisis is on. It could be a forever thing. And actually, when I think about the depth of pockets that bank shareholders typically have, it's pretty mean. I honestly, I think this time around, we've been a lot more blessed with empathetic kind of leadership at the top in banks, and probably that they've learned a lot from previous crises, that at some point the good times are going to come back. They're probably going to come back stronger. We've just been through the longest bull run in history, right? So who's not to say that the same thing could happen this time? And when that happens, you hire people back. You want to retain that kind of institutional knowledge. And typically, once you've let people go, you've spent a lot of money on restructuring costs, which you're never, ever going to get back. So the short-term benefit is exactly that. It's just short-term, because you've got to go hire and these guys back, and probably at greater rates. So let's see. Maybe it's just some learning. I'm always a glass half full kind of guy, and try to look on the bright side and see the best in human nature. Maybe I'm a little bit naive on that. But yeah, it is definitely different this time. Definitely
No,
different.
it definitely feels different because maybe it's the crisis has come from outside the banking industry. It's kind of almost an act of God, right? This virus has been thrown at the whole world. And maybe we have learned from the last 10, 15 years. So many banks are now announcing, you know, banks that up to recently were talking about laying off tens or 20 or 30,000 people, these big banks in the world. Many of them actually announced a job freeze, like no one's going to be laid off this year. We'll see if
Yeah,
that holds true or not, but it's an amazing
absolutely.
change.
Yeah,
Yeah,
completely.
yeah, yeah. Could you explore a little bit more my comment? I don't know if it's a throwaway line, but the Slack comment, because that resonated with me. Because banks don't generally use. I know WhatsApp is used by everyone in the Middle East, in India, in Asia, but banks generally are very cautious about their communication channels, and we're now beginning to use Zoom much more. We're using, as you mentioned, Slack. How much are we changing the way we're, apart from the obvious that we're now maybe all 98%, 95% working remotely, how much are we changing sort of communication, organizational, just the way we work, and how sticky will that be when we come out the other side of the tunnel?
Yeah, I am. I don't know how I ever lived without Slack, to be honest with you. And the first time I used it was, when I went off to be an entrepreneur, and I'm a failed entrepreneur, but I'll be back. But but then coming to big bank, and I start talking about it. It's no, we can't use that. But actually, very lucky that we've got an information security team that kind of get it, that find a way to control risks around it. And the Slack looks a bit different than the one that I had in a startup, but it does pretty much everything I need it to. It's just locked down a lot more. There's a lot more kind of heavy restrictions around it. It's not right across the institution for sure, but it is used heavily and will continue to be, I'm sure. It's a great tool. I love it to bits. And like I say, if God forbid anybody takes it away from me, I just don't know how I lived without it.
And more broadly, your sort of innovation agenda, your strategy agenda at BSF, how is that going to change? Are there going to be aspects, maybe you could step back a level, you gave us the organizational structure, but focusing very much on the innovation side, are certain streams going to be accelerated? Are there things that maybe wasn't front of mind 3 months ago and you're like, oh my God, we need to think about this much more now? I mean, obviously on a day-to-day basis, our lives have changed so fundamentally. E-commerce is booming, online payments is booming. Who's going to walk into a shop and pay a bill in the future in a kiosk when you realize how easy it is to pay online?
Absolutely. So I think there's been like two broad categories of driving factors around it. There's the indirect bit. So this is SAMA asking us to move things faster. And then there's kind of the direct stuff. So initiatives that internally we've been asked to accelerate, or we believe that we should accelerate. So there's been some real benefits. It always used to baffle me and drive me insane why I couldn't sell, asset products online. Still had to have a wet signature, couldn't be a digital signature. A lot of it not driven by regulators, but driven by the law of the land, right? That
Right.
Laws state that we have to have copies, they have to be physically signed, and so on and so forth. And a lot of that's been a big limiting factor on the take up of digital and the growth and the profitability of digital banking. We rely on interest income probably more than we do fee income, sadly. But you look, SAMA's now said, hurry up, get personal loans online so that people can apply and that we can have instant dispersal into it. So great, this is what we want to do. So I think it's been a huge benefit as we see that kind of move through. When I look on the kind of the direct stuff, things that have been in our control, deployment of remote working tools. Were BSF 100% set up for remote working? No, we weren't. But within 3 weeks, you would not believe the amount of laptops that were built and sent out, VPN scaled, all of this kind of good stuff, collaboration tools in place, WebEx migrated up to WebEx Cloud and the likes. So we've done a lot to kind of accelerate that. When I look at on the wholesale side of the business, so things around transaction banking, cash management, when we look at documentary trade and having to go into branches to do this type of thing, we've got to find a different way to do it because we just can't do it that way now. And then when I look at kind of new business ventures, it's been unwavering, the support. There was never any doubt for some of the things that we're building and some of the things that we're strategizing around, but it's just been full on acceleration now. Get it done, hurry up. So it's been a bit of a blessing in some ways.
Are there any of these sort of projects that were potentially on the back burner, or you're meeting maybe debate and resistance internally that COVID's just accelerated or is likely to accelerate in the next few months?
Yeah, so so some things weren't just at the forefront because they just weren't needed. So when you look at, my remit for digital is not just kind of what goes on in retail, what goes on in wholesale, but it's right across the organization. So when you look at how we support the employee value proposition and employee mobilization, that type of stuff, I would love to have virtualized our desktop, right? To big kind of infrastructure spend. It's great from a security perspective, but it just wasn't on the radar type thing, and it takes some time. Hello.
Hi.
Are we
You're
back?
Yeah, we're back.
Okay, no problem. If that was a question, my Arabic is awful, so please English. Yeah.
So you're talking about desktop virtualization, I think, when we go.
Yeah, and to kind of accelerate that. Maybe that will move forward now, because the quickest way that we've been able to do it is by laptops and get people kind of skilled up and tooled up in that way. And like I say, the transaction banking stuff, again, we've put the foot on the gas on that. I'm glad to say that I haven't seen us have to pivot. So we're going in the wrong direction and we've had to change. It's been more around, let's get on with it. Let's just push that little bit further. And, it's against the backdrop of, because my role's kind of so broad, it's on the strategy side, marketing, and all the way through to kind of digital and customer experience. It's always on the backdrop of, we've got other big issues that we need to tackle, right? There are potential kind of credit losses in the future, and have we really got time to look at digital, right? Because we've got these other things to do. So
sure. Mike, can you give us a little bit of a flavor of what's happening on the ground in Riyadh or Jeddah or points elsewhere in the kingdom right now in terms of just the nature of financial services? I did a call recently, I think it was just a week, 10 days ago, and we were discussing just how much in March, and things were only beginning to change halfway through March, how much in March online payment volumes were rocketing, both in the UAE but particularly in Saudi. Some of the online payment gateways I was chatting with were talking about volumes up 50, 60% for bill payments, just paying stuff, because before a lot of, you'd go to shops, or if you did e-commerce, it would be cash on delivery. I don't know if there's any kind of trends or flavor or anecdotes you can share from what you're hearing, what you're seeing on the ground in your footprint in BSF.
Yeah, so definitely, right? So if you just think of it from a physical perspective, we've still got branches open, But, you know,
Mm.
I wish I could share pictures with you now. I just don't have them on my laptop. They're on my phone. But, you know, the way branches have had to be reconfigured to comply
Mm.
with social distancing and to keep people safe. So very kind of clear, physical, demonstrable changes that we've had to put in place. Payments volumes through the roof, use of cash management through the roof, use of online trade portfolio through the roof, absolutely. New downloads of mobile banking app, exactly the same. Not quite the same as the online banking, so mobile
Mm.
first, which is the way that we're designing all kind of future stuff, has definitely outstripped online banking around that, which is great to
Mm.
see. What else is there? What else? Yeah, it's definitely blown up. So another great example. Last week we had two customers come and wanted almost 3,000 new point of sale devices today, right? You're kind of like, wow, how the hell are we going to pull that off, right? You know, how are we going to kind of get those volumes mobilized out the shop? But it's great, right? It's great from so
Mm.
many different things. Drives our fee income. So it's all of these things that are changing. And I genuinely believe that this will just change the shape of banking again in the future, no doubt.
Mm. Mm. No, for sure. So many things in banking are going to be accelerated. The previous crises had good and bad, and this one will be the same. Now, to the fintechs who were listening in, what kind of advice would you give them in terms of they're looking to collaborate with banks? It's quite hard for fintechs, even in a pre-COVID world, to work with banks, right? I've worked for a big bank for almost 25 years. It's not easy fitting procurement processes, our compliance systems, and so on. And what advice would you give these fintechs in a COVID or post-COVID world, whether it's on B2B projects or B2C projects, or even just now? I mean, what should they be doing? Should they be knocking on your door or your virtual door, or
Yeah.
what would you recommend to them?
So I think first and foremost, be patient with those big banks. We are slow by design, sadly, right? And this just makes
Mm.
us even slower in some ways.
Yeah.
We've got a million and one things to implement,
Mm.
from SAMA, for instance. We've got to look after our people, and we've got to support our customers through these dark
Mm.
times. All of that said, at least at BSF, I can't talk for any of our competition, but we remain fully committed to taking a real driving seat, an active role in putting KSA at the top of the digital charts globally in terms of development of the fintech ecosystem.
Mm.
So we're there, but just bear with me. And all of the
Mm.
fintech that we've been working with, when I've had my one-to-ones with them, they've heard that loud and clear from me. You know, this isn't an excuse. Just give me a bit of time. If I told you it would take you 2 weeks, maybe it's going to take me 4 weeks now to do it, just because there's so many other things. So be patient, number one.
Mm.
Second one, take this time, what's the word, to professionalize even more than what you are today. So the fintechs that have engaged with BSF and me will know that
Mm.
the standard of due diligence that we put them through is very detailed,
Mm.
but fit for purpose at the same time, because we're not trying to buy Riyadh Bank, for instance. We're looking at it from a different way.
Mm.
But it's look at those kind of standards of what you have. I think taking this time to get some of that in order. None of it's going to be a waste of time. It'll be great for when you engage with VCs, with other banks, with regulator, all of that. But just use this time productively, because I think it'll just benefit fintech massively.
Mm.
I think, third one, looking for new angles and use cases for what they have today, and exploit it, shout about it, get it out there. So staying visible on social media, sharing stories of what you're doing, how you're being impacted by all of this, right? But
Mm.
also how you're planning to come out on top. Comms, so keeping your own people briefed on runway, having that honesty and transparency. Everyone that was with me, it clearly always knew exactly where we were on a runway basis, how many months or weeks we had left to kind of survive, where we were with investors. I think it's really important to have that and keep your investors fully briefed, because they've put money in and they'll want to help if they can. So share your problems early while we can still kind of do something with it.
Mm.
And then finally, keep the faith, right? People that know me well will know that my real heroes are not the Jamie Dimons and the Lloyd Blankfeins of this world, but it's those kind of small entrepreneurs that take real risk of their own to change the way that we bank in the future and to try and make banking better for everyone. So just keep the belief, don't lose that. So and if I can help in any way, in terms of counsel, sounding board, whatever, just reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'll do my utmost to get back to you.
You're gonna get 100 messages now on LinkedIn, Mike.
Let's see. It's a normal thing anyway. So it's my nighttime chores.
I was going to ask you about digital banks and virtual banks, but I think Myrna is suggesting we should go to Q&A, so I'll spare you
Sure.
being grilled on digital banks for now. Myrna, do we have questions on the line?
Okay, guys, so let's see. Any questions to Mike or even to Ronit, since Ronit has a lot to say about this subject? Anybody here?
Hi, Myrna. Vaibhav here from Koyan. I have a question both for Mike and Ronit. So, Mike, as you rightly said, that the banks are doing tons of things, both internally and externally, to manage the continuity of the business. So, from that perspective, you as a banker, will you be open to have a new discussion with fintechs, provided that they give you something which makes a lot of meaning in this situation in terms of digitalization, or if they say that I want to work with you for next 2-3 months and show you how we can help you in these tough times and also give you a way forward. So would it be a right expectation for fintechs to come and have a chat with banks, provided that they really have something unique and it's not an everyday solution?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. And again, I can't talk about all banks, but I'll tell you about Banque Saudi Fransi. We're not closed for fintech business. It's just taken us that little bit longer to engage properly. So still very, very much open, especially if there's things that fintech has that can help us and the ecosystem and our customers or our employees during this crisis. So yeah, still very much open for business. All that I ask is that we just can't be as responsive as what we were 2 months ago, although we are still responding. I'm just having to slow it down as we redeploy resources to look at some of the live shorter term issues as well.
I don't know if Isabella is on the line. Isabella, if you're there, I'd like to bring you into the conversation as well, just to get a different perspective. We're talking a lot about the current crisis, but the reason Mike and I are having this conversation about digitalization in the context of COVID is obviously banks were built at a particular time. Most of us work in banks, particularly on the consumer side, that was really built on 1950s, 1960s, 1970s type products, concepts, architectures. Maybe the capital market side of our banks are somewhat newer. And digitization is supposed to bring us into the 21st century. And Isabella, you might have some questions about the bank of the future. What does the bank of the 21st century look like, particularly the next generation of customers, the next generation of stakeholders?
Yeah, no, that is a good topic that you are talking about. And as someone who I guess is part of the next generation, supposedly,
Sorry, that was a massive generalization there.
No, it's fine. No worries. But like you rightly said, I think digitization has kind of brought banks into the 21st century. But do you think, along with digitalization, banks kind of have more of a social kind of moral obligation to the future generation in terms of financial planning? Because I think if there's one thing that this crisis has taught us is that you should always be prepared for a rainy day. And particularly among the youth, do you think banks potentially do have some kind of role or could be playing a greater role in helping the youth financially plan or helping them organize their savings, especially because they have a pretty short financial history relative to other people? And
Sure.
And like the role that digitalization could play in that kind of financial organization and planning.
Totally. I don't know, Mike, if I'll start and maybe I'll throw this into a commentary / question format for Mike in a way, because in a way, sort of, Mike, we talked about the last financial crisis and it was all about cutting staff, cutting balance sheet, and banks got a very bad rap in the media, amongst politicians, among stakeholders out of that crisis. That crisis wasn't particularly good in any way for either banks financially or reputationally. Now, this time around, we're going into it, and we've already touched upon how, whether it's about how we communicate with staff, how we're sort of saying to staff, jobs are going to be protected. Banks are trying not to be for want of a better word, the bad guys this time around. How much more can the banks do to tie into some of the questions Isabella asked about, whether it's ESG, whether it's being good for their clients? I mean, think back to the, pre-digital age in it's very common in the 1970s, 1980s for banks, whether public sector banks or private sector banks, to bring in young clients. Basically the children of their clients would come along with their passbooks, open an account, have a piggy bank. And there was this kind of idea of, that's how banks would recruit clients, right? Whether it was in Germany, in the UK, in Japan, in the US, banks recruited clients intergenerationally. I'm still a client of a bank in the UK for no other reason that my mother was a client of that bank. And before that, her parents, no other reason. So how do you think banks can use digital, Mike, better, or this crisis better to tackle some of these questions that Isabella's throwing out?
Yeah, absolutely. Great questions, great observations. And you'll have to come and be part of our user testing, Isabella, for some of the stuff that we're doing. We'd love feedback. This is a kind of a bit of a speech that I've used millions of times, but nobody likes banks, right? We're pretty dull, we're boring. We get paid well, we get decent bonuses, which obviously sticks in people's throats sometimes. But even though people don't like us, they involve us in the most important parts of their life, happy times in their life. Yep. For me, buying a new car, because I'm a big petrol head, there's nothing like it. It's exciting for me. Buying a home, starting a new business, new baby, planning for the future, major kind of moments in life where you need the bank. Very happy. But what happens when you come to us banks to help you in these happy times? We just make them a miserable kind of process. And we're trying to change that, right? We're trying to change that through the reduction of friction, but also coming at it from a very, very different way. The banks that will get this wrong, and again, my opinion, but I'm pretty vocal around this. I think that the banks that will get this wrong is if they literally take what they have today and just try and package it on an online platform. It's not going to work. We adopt an approach with our primary research called Jobs to be Done, where we look at the jobs that our customers have to do on a daily basis. Financial planning, transparency of money, knowing if it's safe to spend, a bit of financial literacy, that old book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, there's a lot of stuff in there that makes a hell of a lot of sense. And it's by twisting all of that on its head and using that kind of jobs to be done approach where we are designing very, very different value propositions. Sure, it might be an asset or a liability product that it comes out at the end of it, but it doesn't feel like that. It feels that it's just landing perfectly for what you need there and then. And you'll start to see a lot of that towards the back end of this year and a hell of a lot next year as well. So different mindset, we got to do it. Long may our competition continue with the former and try to digitize what they've got today rather than reimagine what we have. Gives us a big advantage, but there, we know we've got good competition as well that are probably thinking exactly the same as us.
Great. Hope that dealt with some of the questions, Isabella, you had. I don't know if you had a follow-up, or Myrna, do we have someone else on the line who wants to ask a question?
If it's okay, I actually do have a follow-up question.
Go for it, Isabella.
Okay, awesome. So you did say that, for example, your bank is making more of an effort to increase mobility of banking through increasing digitization, but how do you think you guys compare to other banks, like, for example, Monzo, which has kind of been very revolutionary in the way that it treats banking, particularly among the youth? So I set up my Monzo account a couple of months ago, and I was just surprised at how easy it was to set up the account. I didn't need to actually physically visit a bank, and I was able to do it all through my phone.
Yeah. So how do we compare? We don't today, right? We absolutely don't. There's not a single standalone bank in this region that compares to any of it. There's value propositions like Live. I think, you know, Jay and the team over there have done a great job at kind of trying to make Live fit more in that kind of social bracket as opposed to, you know, a true banking bracket. And I watch it with great admiration. But in terms of legacy banks, we're not, because we're still stuck on this old legacy infrastructure, legacy mindset, legacy talent, legacy thinking, old banking. Monzo designed from new. It had a brand new kind of tech stack that makes it more nimble. It's got a different approach. It didn't have any kind of branch. We're starting from a very different place. And, you know, people that kind of listened to when we launched our 5-year strategy to probably 2,500, 3,000 of our staff, you know, one of the big key takeaways from my message to them was that if we're going to get to where the likes of Monzo are, we need to start from a different place. If we start from where we are, we're going to fail. And this is this whole idea of reimagining the way things are doing, instead of saying, oh, it's done like that in a branch, let's try and make it straight through the processing of it, because that journey just doesn't work anymore. So yeah, I'm under no illusion that we're no comparison to Monzo. Even though we do some of the things, those customer journeys just aren't where they should be. But we're trying, right? And we're going to get better and better and better.
Mike, can I take Isabella's question and you answer a bit further along, please?
Yeah, sure.
So, I mean, in our previous conversation that we had one-on-one, we touched very briefly on digital banks, and obviously Isabella's raised the topic of Monzo and the Revoluts and the Starlings of the world. In the UK have caused a bit of a storm, and N26 in certain European markets. And out in Hong Kong, you've got these so-called virtual banks they were supposed to be launched, but, you know, COVID's maybe delayed them. What's interesting for me is that some of those virtual banks in Hong Kong and Singapore, the digital challenger banks, were being backed by or funded by existing banks. And then you mentioned Live as a digital proposition. And I had, you know, I met up with some of my friends at Emirates NVIDIA a couple of months ago, just before COVID hit. And for no reason, just for experiment, signed myself up as a client. And this is not meant to be a pitch for them, but I was positively surprised at how quickly they onboarded me.
It's amazing.
You know, I put my Emirates ID in online. It was 100% online.
Yeah.
The courier came, took my thumbprint, boom, it was done. And I was like, okay, it's not a standalone bank, but it's not bad.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's nothing that I would change with Liv's onboarding process. It rocks.
Right.
It's slick. Like I say, Jay and the gang there,
Yeah.
they've done an amazing job.
Yeah.
But they're not all like that, right? They're just
Right.
not
Right.
like that. But I
Yeah.
do genuinely believe that if we change our mindsets as the big kind of legacy banks, we've got, and we're allowed to be flexible in the way we
Yeah.
do things, and change mindset, different kind of talent that we bring in. We've got a lot bigger advantages than a true digital challenger bank has. A lot more.
Right.
In
Right.
terms of
Right.
richness of data, balance sheet, get to profitability quicker, standing with regulators, all of that type of stuff. Honestly, big banks are their own worst enemy, right? We just put roadblocks in front of ourselves. Drives me nuts at times, right? It really does.
Right. Right. Mike, there's a question just on that point. I'm just going to read it out saying, do you think that the banks that are launching independent digital banks, what's the right approach for them to do that? Should they, how would you go about doing it? Would you, just hypothetically, if you had a bunch of bankers in your, on this webinar looking for advice, and not necessarily Monzo 2.0, but trying to, whether it's do something like Monzo or something like Live, but a fully fledged bank rather than just a proposition, what kind of advice would you give those bankers?
I'm a little bit reluctant to give it because some of
Trade
it's
secrets.
It is, honestly, it genuinely is our secret sauce. It's our KFC recipe that's locked away, or the secret ingredients of Coca-Cola that's in there. But just lend as quickly as you can, right?
Right.
It always amazes me, and maybe it's because even though I try and look like the new kid on the block, I'm still a bit old school when it comes to fundamentals. Companies that are losing tens of millions of dollars every year, but with billion-dollar valuations. That wasn't, when I was doing my studies and my MBA and whatever else, that wasn't the way I was trained to come up with kind of valuations. And I think that when you look at their lack of profitability, they're spending a lot on continuing to develop their proposition, a lot on technology, a lot on customer acquisition, which is great. But until you, and it's always free, it's always fee free, particularly in the UK, right? Who pays for banking in the UK? It's an insane concept. But you need to get that interest income going, right? And that's, in my honest opinion, is what holds back the digital challenges, is not having that scale of balance sheet, which a bank like BSF has, and the ability to deploy capital and put it to work. So that is the most kind of obvious one that I'm willing to kind of opine on, but the other stuff, Rohit, I'm sorry, it was it's just a little bit secret sauce for me.
That's okay. We'll watch and learn from how you guys do it.
Thank you.
Another question came in from the same gentleman is, given that, and you've alluded to this already, given that budgets are going to be challenged this year, I mean, profits are going to be down for the banking industry. We've seen some of the Q1 numbers already out of the US banks, huge loan loss provisions being taken in Q1 by some of the American banks. You talked about oil being where it is. It's going to affect the region. What would you say to fintechs right now? Is there an opportunity here to do, given that costs are under pressure, is there an opportunity for partnerships where you can, share, rather than the fintech being a cost, you can go to some kind of revenue sharing model? Or is there like a different way of working, or refining the way you work with fintechs, just given that there is going to be pressure on everyone's budgets this year?
Yeah, so nothing has changed in our view on collaboration, partnership, cooperation with fintech because of COVID. We've got a little bit slower because we are having to work on some of the non kind of digital things. But we've always been very focused on, let's not reinvent the wheel. If there's somebody that can do it now, then let's do it with them, all right? As long as the commercials stack up, they pass due diligence, all of this type of stuff, you know, I'd much rather share revenue and have a portion of something than 0% of everything, you know? It's just doesn't make sense. So I've got honestly, nothing's changed from our mindset because of COVID-19 or oil prices. We're always one of, let's not reinvent the wheel.
Sure. And the final question I can see that's been asked is, so we're all working, most of us are working remotely now. How do you keep track of whether it's in your team, whether it's in the broader organization, from a good and a bad perspective? How do you monitor what people are doing in the organization? And I guess, how do you motivate and incentivize them? Because you're not there physically to sort of lead the troops.
Yeah. So a lot of what we've done comes down to the how you recruit, what you recruit for, and the type of people that you bring on board even before this. And we've always looked for people that are self-starters, that need little direction. They don't want great direction and someone looking over their shoulder, and you give them that kind of freedom. So we've been pretty blessed that we've hired the right kind of caliber of people anyway, that we know will go off and do it anyway. We have daily stand-ups, so we know exactly what's going on. First thing in the morning, everybody gets their shot to stand up, talk about, you know, what they've got to do today, any of the challenges. Everyone that works for me knows that that's not really true. I work for them. My job is to help remove those roadblocks and set them up for success so they can kind of get on with it. So I'm there ready to listen to the team to figure out what it is that they need me to do for them. And we just have that very, very transparent. And honestly, using tools like Slack as well, where we can just ping ideas, bounce stuff around very quickly. Everything's real time, right? We don't have to wait. And we continue at that level of engagement. Can it be better? I'm sure it can. And we're all continue to learn, but a lot of it's just down to the type of people, the way you recruit people, and just making sure that you keep talking.
Great. Well, thanks for coming along today, or zooming in from the Lake District. And we're gonna watch with interest, so we can copy your secret sauce.
Indeed. Let's hope people like all those ingredients put together. Right.
Absolutely. Long live virtual banks. Okay.
Thanks,
guys. Thanks to everyone for logging in today.
Thanks, Ronit. Pleasure.
Bye.
All the best. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.